The diner was crowded that evening, the kind of busy that made it hard to move without bumping into someone. The smell of fried food and coffee filled the air. People were laughing, talking, and tapping on their phones while waiting for their tables. Behind the counter, the waitress moved with quiet determination, her apron tied tightly around her waist, a notepad in her hand, ready to take orders. She had worked here for years, knew the regulars, and had learned how to handle every kind of customer, from the friendly ones to the ones who seemed to take pleasure in being difficult. It had been a long day. Orders were flying in, and the kitchen staff shouted over the noise to make sure everything was done correctly. The waitress stayed calm, weaving between tables and carrying trays filled with plates of food. Her steps were steady, almost rhythmic, as if she was dancing to a tune only she could hear. Even though some people might have thought her job was small or insignificant, she took pride in it. Every smile she received from a satisfied customer reminded her why she kept going. At one of the corner tables, a group of 3 men and 2 women had just sat down. They seemed loud, talking over the music and laughing at jokes that were more about mocking others than being funny. The waitress approached their table with a polite smile, her pen ready to take their orders. She greeted them warmly, but their laughter didn't stop. Instead, it turned toward her. One of the men leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "Well, look at this, a little waitress running around like she owns the place," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. The other members of the group laughed along, some making gestures as if to mimic her movements. The waitress didn't flinch. She simply nodded and said, "I'll be happy to take your order whenever you're ready." The man raised his eyebrows and smirked. "You sure you can handle all of us?" he asked, a laugh hiding in his throat. The group snickered again, making the waitress's skin crawl, but she didn't show it. She had learned long ago that some people would try to put others down, but losing her composure would only give them more satisfaction. Another waiter passed by, giving her a sympathetic look, but she just shook her head. She had faced this kind of behavior many times before. She took a deep breath and asked the group for their orders. They started giving them slowly, making small jokes each time they spoke. One of the women pretended to forget what she wanted and asked the waitress to repeat the menu, clearly trying to irritate her. The waitress smiled politely, repeated the options, and waited patiently. Meanwhile, other diners were watching quietly. Some shook their heads at the rude behavior, while others focused on their meals, not wanting to get involved. The atmosphere at the table with the mocking group was tense, but the waitress's calmness made it clear that she wasn't going to let their behavior ruin her evening. She jotted down the orders carefully, making sure nothing was missed, even as the group continued to make sarcastic comments. The kitchen staff started preparing the meals, calling out orders as the dishes were ready. The waitress balanced plates on her arms, moving through the crowded diner with skill and precision. Each step was careful yet confident, as she made her way to each table. Her hands were steady, her focus unwavering. Despite the rude comments from the corner table, she continued to serve others with genuine care. As she delivered drinks and appetizers to other diners, she kept an eye on the mocking group, noticing how their laughter was becoming a little louder, more pointed. One of the men leaned across the table and made a gesture, imitating how she had carried a tray just moments before. The waitress didn't respond. She simply kept working, her expression neutral but her mind sharp, planning her next move, waiting for the right moment. Time passed slowly at that table. The group seemed to be testing her patience, trying to see if she would lose her cool. But she remained composed, serving each dish with care, placing glasses neatly, and ensuring that their orders were correct. Her movements were smooth, almost mechanical, but there was an underlying grace in how she handled everything. It was clear that she had been trained not only in the art of serving food but in the art of dealing with people. Other diners started to notice the contrast. While some people at the corner table were loud and mocking, the waitress's demeanor drew quiet respect. A few people even started whispering to each other, commenting on how calm and professional she was. It was as if her patience and skill were speaking louder than any words, showing that she was capable and confident even in the face of disrespect. The group at the corner table didn't seem to notice the growing admiration around them. They were too busy trying to make her feel small, thinking that their laughter and comments could shake her. But she had learned a long time ago that people like this often underestimate those they try to belittle. She had a quiet strength, one that didn't need to be loud or aggressive. Her actions spoke for themselves. She moved to deliver another round of drinks, carefully placing each glass in front of the right person. One of the men leaned forward, making a mocking comment about how she had managed to carry so many plates without dropping them. She smiled politely, nodded, and moved on, unfazed. In her mind, she knew that the real moment would come soon, a moment where she would show exactly why no one should underestimate her. As the evening continued, the diner remained busy. Orders kept coming in, and the noise never seemed to stop. The waitress continued her work, interacting with other customers, making small talk, and keeping the mood light where she could. She was a professional through and through, never letting the negativity at one table overshadow the overall experience for the other diners. Even the manager noticed her composure. From his spot near the kitchen, he saw how she handled the mocking group without raising her voice or showing irritation. He knew that it took a special kind of patience and skill to remain calm under such circumstances. The other staff members also watched quietly, learning from her example, realizing that sometimes the best way to deal with difficult people was with dignity and quiet confidence. As part 1 comes to a close, the scene is set. The diner is alive with activity. The waitress continues her work with grace, and the mocking group is still trying to provoke her. But the tension is building. There is an unspoken sense that something unexpected is about to happen, a moment that will shift the entire atmosphere and leave everyone, especially the rude customers, stunned. The waitress's patience, skill, and quiet determination are ready to shine, and the diner is about to witness a moment that no one will forget. The stage is set for the remarkable turn of events that will show everyone why underestimating someone can lead to the most surprising outcomes. The corner table continued to laugh and joke, trying to see if the waitress would break under the pressure. Each comment was sharper than the last, each gesture more pointed, but she stayed calm. She moved between the tables with the same steady pace, her notepad ready, her smile polite but controlled. There was a quiet strength in the way she carried herself, a sense that she had faced situations like this before and knew exactly how to respond. One of the men at the corner table made a loud comment about her uniform, pretending that it was too small and pointing to the apron. The woman next to him joined in, rolling her eyes and making exaggerated gestures, as if to imitate the waitress walking by. The group laughed, thinking they were clever, but the waitress didn't respond. She simply jotted down their orders and repeated them back, making sure everything was correct. Her voice was calm, even and clear, showing no hint of irritation. Other diners began to notice the scene. Some watched quietly, curious to see how she would react. Some shook their heads at the rudeness of the group, while others whispered to each other about how composed the waitress looked. The contrast was striking. The mocking group seemed loud and brash, while the waitress's demeanor was steady and confident. It was clear to anyone watching that she was not easily rattled. The waitress moved on to other tables, serving food and drinks with care. Each time she passed the corner table, the group tried a new tactic. One of the women pretended to drop her napkin and waited for the waitress to pick it up, making a comment under her breath about how slow she was. Another man leaned back and made a gesture as if the waitress had tripped while carrying a tray earlier in the evening. Each attempt to provoke her failed, and her calmness seemed only to intensify their frustration. She knew that patience was her greatest weapon. She had learned from experience that reacting to mockery only gave people like this what they wanted. Instead, she focused on her work, paying attention to the details that mattered. She remembered the regular customers' faces, made sure the orders were correct, and kept her movements precise. Each tray she carried, each plate she delivered, became a silent testament to her skill and composure. At one point, the group called out to her, asking if she could manage their table alone. They said it in a mocking tone, as if daring her to fail. The waitress paused for a moment, looking at them, and then simply smiled. "Of course," she said politely, and moved toward their table with her tray. Her calm acceptance of the challenge seemed to confuse them. They were expecting her to respond with irritation or frustration, but instead, she showed no fear. As she served their appetizers, she did so with such grace and precision that other diners started to whisper to each other. They noticed how she moved, the way she balanced multiple plates without dropping a single one, and how she kept her focus on her job despite the distractions. Some diners began to cheer quietly, impressed by her skill and professionalism. The mocking group had clearly underestimated her, and it was beginning to show. The group tried another tactic. One of the men placed his drink in a tricky position on the table, pretending to test her ability to reach it without spilling anything. The waitress simply leaned over, picked up the glass with ease, and placed it back down without a single drop falling. She smiled at the group, her calmness almost daring them to try something harder. The others at the table looked at each other, unsure of how to respond to someone who refused to be intimidated. The kitchen was busy, with orders coming in fast and staff calling out dishes as they were ready. The waitress moved quickly, efficiently, but carefully. She delivered a main course to a nearby table, placing each plate perfectly. Then she returned to the corner table with the next round of orders. The group continued their mocking, but it had begun to lose its edge. Their laughter seemed forced, their jokes less sharp. They were realizing slowly that their attempts to provoke her were not working. One of the women at the corner table tried to embarrass the waitress by asking for a complicated modification to her meal. The waitress listened carefully, repeated the request back to ensure she had it right, and then moved to place the order. She executed it flawlessly, bringing the dish back exactly as requested. The woman looked at it, surprised, and then at the waitress, who was smiling politely. It was a small victory, but it was starting to turn the group's attitude. Other diners began to notice the shift. The group that had been mocking her no longer seemed in control of the room. Instead, the waitress's professionalism and calm demeanor were drawing attention. People started to watch her more closely, appreciating the way she handled herself under pressure. Her patience, skill, and quiet confidence were beginning to make a real impression. The waitress continued her work, moving from table to table, never letting the corner group's behavior distract her. She noticed a young boy watching her as she carried a tray of drinks, and she gave him a friendly smile. His eyes lit up and he waved. Small moments like this reminded her why she loved her job. It wasn't just about serving food. It was about connecting with people, about showing kindness and skill even in the midst of chaos. Back at the corner table, the group was growing increasingly frustrated. They had tried every tactic they could think of, but nothing had shaken her. One of the men muttered under his breath, clearly annoyed, while the others exchanged worried glances. They had expected an easy target, someone who would respond to their mockery, but instead, they were met with unwavering calm. The waitress returned to their table again, this time carrying a tray with their main courses. She placed each plate carefully, making sure everything was arranged perfectly. The group tried to make a joke about the presentation, but it fell flat. The waitress simply smiled and stepped back, her posture relaxed, her confidence clear. It was becoming obvious to everyone in the diner that she was not someone to be underestimated. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere at the corner table began to change. The group's laughter grew quieter, their jokes less pointed. The energy they had brought to the room was fading, replaced by a sense of uncertainty. Other diners continued to watch, many of them impressed by the waitress's composure and professionalism. It was clear that she had turned the situation around without saying a word, simply through her actions and demeanor. The waitress continued to move through the diner, attending to other customers, checking on drinks, and clearing tables. She remained aware of the corner group, but she never let them distract her. Her focus was on doing her job well, on showing the kind of skill and patience that made her respected by both colleagues and customers. Every action she took reinforced the quiet power she carried within her. The group tried one final tactic before the waitress finished their service. They asked her to perform a small trick, something that might embarrass her or make her appear clumsy. The waitress paused, looked at them, and then with a calm smile said, "I'll be happy to." The diners around them leaned in slightly, curious to see what would happen next. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a quiet tension as everyone waited to see how she would respond. Her response was simple but effective. She executed the request flawlessly, with a combination of skill and grace that left everyone watching in awe. The group at the corner table sat in stunned silence, their mockery evaporating as they realized just how underestimated the waitress had been. Other diners began to clap quietly, showing their appreciation for her talent and composure. By the end of the evening, the dynamic in the diner had completely shifted. The corner group was no longer the center of attention. Instead, all eyes were on the waitress, who had handled the situation with remarkable poise. Her patience, skill, and quiet confidence had turned a difficult moment into a display of strength and professionalism. The atmosphere in the diner was filled with respect and admiration for the woman who had refused to be intimidated, showing everyone that calmness and competence can speak louder than mockery and noise. The diner had settled into a rhythm, plates clattering in the kitchen, soft chatter at the tables, and the occasional call for refills. The waitress moved among the customers with grace, but the corner table remained her silent challenge. They had tried to provoke her, to test her limits, and she had met each attempt with calm, quiet precision. Yet even she felt the familiar flutter of anticipation. A moment was coming where she could show the true extent of her skill. It began subtly. A young boy at another table had accidentally knocked over a small glass, and the waitress noticed immediately. Without hesitation, she swooped in, catching the glass mid-fall and setting it back in place before it could shatter. A few customers gasped softly, impressed, and the group at the corner table shot curious looks, realizing that she wasn't just ordinary at her job. They were used to thinking their jokes or interruptions could rattle anyone, but now they could sense something different about her. The woman at the corner table, sensing the shift in attention, whispered to her friends. "Is she really that good?" she asked. Her voice betrayed both doubt and curiosity. The waitress, overhearing none of it, moved confidently toward a new table with a tray full of drinks. She navigated through the crowd like a dancer, each movement precise, each step controlled. Patrons were now looking at her in admiration, some nodding subtly as she served them, recognizing her skill. Then the real surprise came. The waitress approached the corner table with their desserts, balancing 3 plates at once. One of the men leaned forward, smirking, thinking he could finally witness a mistake. But she didn't falter. She placed each dessert in front of the right person without a single wobble or slip. She even added a small flourish, arranging the whipped cream into a delicate pattern. The entire diner seemed to pause, watching her, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. The group sat frozen, unable to respond immediately. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by a mixture of shock and begrudging admiration. A few other diners quietly clapped. Some smiled, impressed by the waitress's poise and the small artistry she had displayed. She didn't boast or call attention to herself. She simply returned to her duties with the same steady rhythm, allowing her actions to speak louder than any words could. A man from another table called out a simple question, asking how she managed to be so calm under pressure. The waitress smiled politely and said softly, "Experience and focus. That's all it takes." It wasn't an arrogant statement. It was matter of fact. The group at the corner table exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that they had underestimated her and that she had been quietly showing her skill the whole time. Then the waitress noticed a spilled drink at a nearby table, someone who had been jostled by the busyness of the diner. She moved with precision, grabbing the napkins, wiping the spill, and making sure the customer felt cared for. Her movements were efficient, almost like choreography, smooth and deliberate. Patrons began whispering to each other about her talent, and even the corner group could no longer maintain their mocking demeanor. Their eyes widened, and the smirks faded. They had laughed at her, but now they were witnessing someone who could handle any challenge with grace. The waitress's attention returned to the corner table. One of the women had accidentally dropped her fork and looked up, expecting her usual polite response. But this time the waitress did something unexpected. With a playful smile, she deftly twirled the fork on her finger, catching it perfectly before it hit the floor. The movement was so smooth and effortless that it drew gasps from nearby diners. Even the group that had mocked her before was stunned. A few whispered to each other, muttering about how skilled she was, their earlier arrogance replaced with disbelief. She placed the fork back on the table with a flourish and continued her work, carrying on as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But the effect lingered. Patrons were now watching her every move, captivated by the way she handled each challenge with both grace and efficiency. The corner group no longer felt in control. They were on the receiving end of someone's quiet brilliance, realizing that mockery could never match skill. The waitress moved through the diner, delivering a tray of drinks to another table, and then returned to clear dishes from the corner group. They had ordered multiple items, but she managed each plate with ease, balancing them without a tremor. Each placement was precise, each step calculated. It was as if she had been practicing this choreography her entire life. The corner group now sat in a mixture of awe and embarrassment, having fully underestimated her abilities. Then something even more astonishing occurred. The diner's music changed, and a small child from another table accidentally bumped into a chair, sending a glass wobbling toward the edge of the table. Before anyone could react, the waitress had darted forward, caught the glass mid-fall and set it safely down. The motion was so fast, so precise, that people whispered among themselves, amazed. Even the corner group could not hide their astonishment. They had mocked her, but now they were witnessing something far beyond what they had expected. The waitress returned to the corner table with a gentle smile, setting down the last of their orders. The group stared at her, their mouths slightly open. For the first time that evening, the room seemed to notice the dramatic shift in attention. It was not her words or complaints that commanded respect, but her actions and her skill. She had transformed from someone they had laughed at into the center of admiration. The diner's other patrons began to murmur quietly among themselves. Some applauded softly, some nodded in acknowledgement, impressed by her grace and competence. The corner group tried to regain their composure, but it was futile. The waitress had changed the energy of the room without even raising her voice. They had mocked, teased, and underestimated her, but now they had no choice but to recognize her ability. Even the manager watched from the kitchen doorway, a proud smile on his face. He knew that it took more than skill to remain so calm and collected under pressure. It required patience, focus, and a quiet confidence that could not be faked. The waitress moved like a professional, executing each task with precision, and yet she made it seem effortless. Her presence alone commanded respect. A customer at another table leaned over and whispered, "She's incredible." The comment was met with quiet agreement by others nearby. The corner group, sensing the shift, tried to laugh it off, but their jokes were now forced, their energy gone. They had thought they could dominate the situation, but the waitress had turned the tables, showing that composure and skill could outshine mockery in a way they had not anticipated. The waitress continued her work, checking on all tables, serving food, and handling requests. Every movement was smooth, deliberate, and precise. The corner group sat in silence, no longer mocking, their earlier arrogance replaced by a mixture of disbelief and humility. They had laughed at her, but now they were witnessing something remarkable. The diner, once filled with noise and chaos, now had a sense of quiet admiration for the waitress who had managed to maintain control without ever raising her voice. As the evening continued, the waitress approached the counter, carrying an empty tray back to the kitchen. She glanced at the corner table briefly, her eyes calm, almost playful, as if acknowledging that the real demonstration of her skill had only just begun. The group at the corner table exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to respond. They had expected a simple target for their jokes, but they had been met with someone far beyond their expectations. By the time part 3 closes, the atmosphere in the diner had transformed. The corner group, once loud and mocking, now sat quietly, unsure of how to regain their dominance. Other patrons admired the waitress's skill and calm demeanor, whispering quietly and sharing their amazement. She had turned what could have been a negative, humiliating experience into a display of grace, precision, and quiet power. The stage was set for what was next, the moment when the waitress would truly leave everyone, including the mocking group, completely stunned. The diner was buzzing with conversation and the clatter of dishes, but there was a new energy in the air, a sense that something extraordinary had just happened. The corner group that had mocked the waitress sat in stunned silence, their faces a mix of embarrassment and astonishment. They had come to ridicule, to provoke a reaction, but instead they were confronted with skill, grace, and a quiet confidence that left them speechless. The rest of the diners had noticed too, and many were now watching with admiration, quietly cheering for the waitress. The waitress moved from table to table, carrying drinks and clearing plates, her movements precise and confident. Each step, each gesture was met with subtle acknowledgement from the customers. Some whispered to each other about her talent, others nodded approvingly, and a few even offered small smiles of respect. The mocking group had tried to dominate the room with their laughter and sarcasm, but it had backfired. They were no longer the focus. The waitress had taken center stage without saying a word. One of the men at the corner table finally broke the silence, attempting to regain control with a forced joke. "Well, I guess she knows what she's doing," he muttered, but his tone lacked the confidence it had held earlier. The woman next to him tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. Their mockery had been deflated, replaced by a recognition that they had underestimated someone who had handled every challenge with poise. They looked around, noticing that other diners were watching, some nodding, others whispering about how impressive the waitress had been. The realization that they had been outshone was undeniable. The waitress approached their table once more, this time with a tray of freshly brewed coffee. She moved smoothly, balancing the tray perfectly, and placed each cup gently in front of the right person. Her smile was warm and polite, but there was an unspoken confidence behind it, a subtle acknowledgement that she had proven herself. The corner group stared, unable to form a witty remark, their earlier arrogance replaced with respect and a touch of embarrassment. Across the diner, other customers began clapping quietly, some giving small cheers. They were impressed not only by her skill but by the way she had maintained composure throughout the evening. Her professionalism and grace had turned a potentially tense and uncomfortable situation into a demonstration of quiet power and confidence. The corner group now sat quietly, realizing that their laughter had been misplaced and that they had underestimated the waitress in every way. The manager, watching from the kitchen, stepped out and smiled. He approached the corner table and addressed the group with a calm voice. "It's clear you didn't expect her to handle everything so well," he said. The group nodded silently, still processing the display of skill they had witnessed. The manager then turned to the waitress and offered a few words of praise, acknowledging her composure, patience, and expertise. She nodded politely, not needing the validation, but appreciating the recognition from someone who understood the work she did. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere in the diner continued to shift. Patrons were more relaxed, smiling, and quietly talking about the unexpected turn of events. The corner group no longer tried to dominate the room. Instead, they watched quietly, reflecting on their behavior and the lesson they had received. The waitress, meanwhile, continued her work with the same steady determination, ensuring that every customer was attended to and satisfied. Her skill and confidence had not only changed the dynamic at one table but had subtly altered the energy of the entire diner. A young child at another table looked up at her with wide eyes, clearly impressed by the way she handled everything. The waitress offered a gentle smile, acknowledging the child, and moved on to clear another table. Small gestures like these reminded the customers that she was not just skilled, but kind and considerate as well. Her actions spoke louder than any words, showing that true strength often lies in quiet confidence and attention to detail. The corner group began to reflect on the events of the evening. They had intended to mock, to feel superior, but the experience had flipped the script entirely. They had underestimated someone who had demonstrated not only her skill in her work, but her patience, grace, and ability to handle pressure with dignity. The embarrassment they felt was tempered by a growing sense of respect, and they exchanged quiet glances, acknowledging that they had learned an unspoken lesson about underestimating others. Meanwhile, the waitress continued her rounds, moving seamlessly between tables, serving food, and engaging with customers. Her focus remained on providing excellent service, ensuring that everyone had a pleasant experience. She did not dwell on the earlier mockery or the reactions of the corner group. Instead, she let her actions demonstrate her abilities, showing that confidence, skill, and professionalism could outshine even the loudest ridicule. The group at the corner table attempted to regain some composure by engaging in conversation, but their voices were subdued. They no longer laughed loudly or made mocking gestures. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and they could feel it. Other diners who had observed the situation nodded in quiet approval, acknowledging the waitress's ability to transform an uncomfortable scenario into a moment of admiration and respect. One of the women at a nearby table leaned over and whispered to her friend, "Did you see how she handled that? She didn't even get upset." The friend nodded, equally impressed. Patrons across the diner exchanged similar comments, all recognizing the quiet skill and calm authority the waitress had displayed. It was not just her ability to serve food efficiently but her grace under pressure and the respect she commanded without ever raising her voice. As the evening neared its end, the diner began to calm down. The once mocking group finally spoke, offering quiet apologies to the waitress, acknowledging that they had been wrong to underestimate her. She smiled politely, accepting their gestures without malice, showing that her strength included forgiveness and professionalism. It was a powerful moment, demonstrating that dignity and composure could transform not only a situation but the people involved. Other diners continued to offer small compliments, some expressing amazement at her skill and patience. The manager approached her once again, handing her a small note of appreciation, recognizing the extraordinary way she had handled the evening. She accepted it with humility, her focus never wavering from her work but her heart quietly warmed by the acknowledgement. The corner group finished their meals in silence, reflecting on the lessons of the evening. They had expected easy amusement, but instead, they had witnessed something far more impressive. A display of calm, professional mastery that had left everyone in awe. They left the diner quietly, no longer mocking, but transformed in their understanding of the power of patience, skill, and quiet confidence. The waitress continued her work until the last customers had left. She cleaned tables, organized the chairs, and ensured that the diner was in perfect order for the next day. Her actions were deliberate and careful, demonstrating the same attention to detail and care that had impressed the customers throughout the evening. The sense of accomplishment she felt was quiet but profound, knowing that she had handled a difficult situation with grace and had earned the respect of those who had doubted her. As Part 4 ends, the diner was filled with a sense of calm admiration. Patrons remembered the events of the evening, sharing their impressions and quietly celebrating the waitress's skill and composure. The corner group had learned a lesson in humility, while the waitress had demonstrated the power of quiet strength and professionalism. The story had reached its emotional climax, setting the stage for the final reflection and resolution, where the lasting impact of her actions would be fully revealed. The diner was quiet now. The busy rush of the evening settled into a gentle hum. Plates were cleared, the last drinks served, and the soft murmur of conversation replaced the earlier chaos. The waitress moved carefully through the tables, wiping down surfaces, straightening chairs, and making sure everything was in order. Her actions were calm and deliberate, a reflection of the same patience and skill she had shown throughout the evening. The atmosphere felt lighter now, almost celebratory, as the patrons reflected on what they had witnessed. The corner group had long since finished their meals. They lingered for a moment, glancing around, clearly unsure of how to act. Their earlier laughter and mocking had vanished, replaced by a quiet sense of respect and perhaps even embarrassment. They had come into the diner intending to feel superior, but they had been met with something far greater than they expected. A display of calm strength, skill, and dignity that had silenced them completely. One of the men finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "I guess we underestimated her." he said, almost to himself. The others nodded quietly, not daring to add much. Their attitude had shifted, not because they had been forced to, but because they had seen firsthand the power of someone who remained composed and professional in the face of ridicule. They had expected a simple target, someone to mock for amusement, but they had encountered someone who could command respect without raising her voice or reacting angrily. The waitress continued her work, noticing the change in their demeanor but not letting it distract her. She had done what she came to do: serve customers, provide excellent service, and handle difficult situations with grace. Her reward was not applause or recognition, though both had come in quiet forms throughout the evening, but the knowledge that she had maintained her composure and shown her true abilities. Each movement, each step, each careful placement of a plate or glass had been a small victory over the mockery and doubt she had faced. Other diners continued to whisper among themselves, sharing their impressions of the evening. Many had been impressed not just by her skill in handling food and drinks, but by the quiet confidence she had displayed. There was a sense of admiration in the air, a recognition that true strength often lay in patience, poise, and attention to detail. The waitress had turned what could have been an uncomfortable, tense situation into an unforgettable lesson in humility and respect. The manager approached her quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder with a small smile. "You handled that beautifully," he said. "I don't know how you stay so calm under pressure, but it's incredible to watch." The waitress nodded politely, acknowledging the praise but keeping her focus on finishing her duties. She did not need accolades to feel satisfied. Her satisfaction came from doing her job well, maintaining her composure, and earning the quiet respect of those who had doubted her. The corner group finally rose to leave. They had paid their bill, their earlier arrogance replaced with a reflective mood. As they passed the waitress, one of them paused and offered a simple, sincere apology. "I'm sorry for earlier," he said. "We shouldn't have treated you like that." The waitress smiled gently, accepting the apology without judgment. There was no bitterness in her response, only a quiet grace that reflected the strength she had shown all evening. It was a small but meaningful exchange, highlighting the human side of the story and the power of dignity. As the group left, other customers began to comment quietly among themselves, sharing their admiration. A family at a nearby table thanked her for her attentiveness, noting how smoothly she had managed everything despite the distractions. A young couple remarked on her patience and composure, sharing how inspiring it was to see someone handle challenges with such grace. Even the staff in the kitchen expressed quiet pride, recognizing the way she had turned a potentially negative situation into a display of professionalism and skill. The waitress took a moment to breathe, straightening her apron and adjusting her notepad. She glanced around the diner, seeing the remaining patrons enjoying their meals, the staff moving efficiently, and the sense of calm that had returned. It was a peaceful moment, a chance to reflect on what had happened. She had faced mockery and disrespect, yet she had remained composed, letting her actions speak louder than any words. The impact of her patience and skill was evident in the admiration of the customers and the subtle shift in the atmosphere of the diner. A small child waved at her from a table, eyes wide with wonder. She smiled back, waving gently, acknowledging the simple connection that made her job meaningful. These small interactions reminded her that her work was not just about serving food, but about connecting with people, showing kindness, and demonstrating that composure and skill could inspire others. It was a human connection, quiet yet powerful, that left a lasting impression on everyone present. The evening continued to wind down, the last customers finishing their meals and preparing to leave. The waitress moved methodically through the tables, clearing dishes, wiping surfaces, and ensuring that everything was in order for the next day. Each task she performed reflected the same care, attention, and professionalism she had shown throughout the night. There was a quiet satisfaction in completing her work with integrity, knowing that she had faced challenges and emerged with dignity intact. As the diner emptied, the waitress took a final glance around the room. The tables were clean, the chairs neatly arranged, and the atmosphere calm and pleasant. She felt a sense of accomplishment, not from recognition or applause, but from the knowledge that she had handled a difficult situation with poise and grace. The lessons of the evening were clear. Patience, skill, and quiet confidence could overcome mockery and disrespect, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it. She began to gather her belongings, preparing to leave for the night. The manager gave her a nod of approval, and the remaining staff offered smiles and quiet words of encouragement. The diner was empty now, but the events of the evening would linger in the memories of the patrons and staff alike. The story of the mocking group and the waitress's response had become a shared experience, a testament to the power of professionalism, patience, and quiet strength. As she stepped outside, the night air felt cool and refreshing. She walked slowly toward her car, reflecting on the events of the evening. The corner group had left, changed by what they had seen, and the other patrons had been inspired by her actions. It was a reminder that true strength and character were often revealed in quiet, unexpected ways, and that the impact of grace and skill could extend far beyond the immediate moment. The waitress paused for a moment, looking back at the diner. She felt a sense of pride, not in herself, but in the way she had handled the situation. She had faced mockery, remained composed, and allowed her actions to speak for her. The respect she had earned was genuine, and the lesson imparted to those who had doubted her was lasting. She smiled to herself, knowing that her work, her patience, and her quiet confidence had made a difference, both in the moment and in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. As she drove home, the events of the evening replayed in her mind. Each challenge, each moment of mockery, had been met with patience and skill. She had shown that composure and confidence could overcome negativity, that dignity and professionalism could inspire respect, and that even in the face of ridicule, one could remain strong and human. The story of the night, the lesson for those who had doubted her, and the admiration of the diners would remain, a reminder of the quiet power that comes from strength, skill, and grace.